Welcome back, everybody, for another episode of Husky Careers Unleashed. Today, we've got a really special guest with us, and we're going to be focusing on her perspective from the hiring side of industry and what makes a successful candidate. So, to kick off our episode today, let's have her introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Happy to be here today. I'm Amber Marshall. I graduated from Michigan Tech in 2012 with a degree in forestry, and again in 2019 with an MBA degree from Michigan Tech again as well. And currently, I'm working as an area manager for a large private industrial timberland owner here in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan.
Very nice. So, you got to spend your college days up here in the UP and then found a career in the UP as well.
Yeah, and I'm actually from the UP as well, so kind of never left.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with that. I absolutely love it up here, and spend as much time up in the Keweenaw as I can and other parts of the UP as well. So let's dive right in kind of with our topic of the day. What has your experience been like as a manager or somebody who conducts the hiring side of things now in your career?
So I've been in this current role as a manager with hiring capacity probably for 5 years. And prior to that, I actually had the opportunity to hire our interns as well. So that kind of prepared me a little bit for the full blown hiring experience. But yeah, I've sat in on, of course, all of our interview processes as we, fill in positions. And I'm happy to say we don't have a lot of turnover. I don't have a great deal of experience, but we've hired some awesome people in this time. So I can definitely kind of hone in on some of the stuff we look for in an interview without a doubt. And a lot of the time, it's always hard to quantify. It's not those hard skills. And I know this is hard and everyone hears it all the time, but truth be told, it's how a person makes you feel during that interview. That's what I've always realized. Like you won't remember all their answers, all their experience exactly after the fact, but you can always be like, wow, candidate X sure just seemed like they'd be a good fit for this role and they'll get along well with our team. So that's really been something we look for is like, can you spend a day in the woods with this person? Because we're in the forestry profession. So sometimes you're either alone a lot or you are with one of your partners from work here. So that's what we always look for. And resilience, a
Mhm.
growth mindset. That's definitely something that goes a long way in this field. Some of the things I've heard people say in interviews that always stick out to me are, I reflected on how I handled XYZ, last year in that job and I could have done it better. I think when someone has the ability to do that, look back a little bit, have some humility, that also goes a long way for sure.
And I think that speaks to just kind of the fundamental understanding that once you've got a degree in something, most employers realize you've had that educational training on those hard skills, but that's not all a job is. And finding the right fit, both personality and cultural wise, for a candidate in a company is really important. So, yes, it's good to have the technical skills and the background and all of those things you learned in college, but that's not the only thing that we're going to be highlighting or talking about, especially in terms of interviewing and ultimately kind of in the job search side of things. Kind of stepping back a little bit and reflecting on your time as a student, kind of transitioning into your career. Did you ever imagine that you were going to be in a role that had a hiring capacity component to it?
No, that's a great question. And honestly, absolutely not. And this stuff that can happen fast, especially we were faced with a lot of retirements and stuff, our demographic was. So opportunities kind of arose quickly. And I think people will find that sometimes you might almost be ready for an opportunity that comes up and maybe not. And you have that choice. But yeah, it kind of just happens. And I think some of those skills we mentioned already, the soft skills lead into that, especially if you end up having to, manage your former peers and stuff. All that comes into play
Mhm.
for sure.
100%. Now, having gone through the process of posting jobs, interviewing, hiring folks, are there any common traits that you see among candidates who tend to be kind of front runners in these job searches?
Yeah, I guess again, I would mention a little bit of diversified experience too. That always helps, of course. Sometimes you don't have that luxury when you're a young person, but that's where I would say feel free to lean on some of your volunteer experience, projects at school, stuff like that. It's kind of nice to see where a person has had some type of maybe project management or they led some type of a team, even if that's a volunteer group, sorority, you name it. So it's good to see those things sprinkled building a resume. Again, I hate to keep leaning on the soft skills, but
Mhm.
like you mentioned, if you're a Michigan Tech graduate, we know those hard skills are there. So that's where we start to look at that other, broad swath of stuff. Volunteerism is big, involvement in the community. Those are all ways that just show a person can not only exceed at school, but manage their time wisely and, get to do some of those other opportunities as well. I think ultimately it just creates a more life experience, I'd say, especially if you're a young
Mhm.
person. It's really good opportunities to gain some of that.
Well, and that ties back to our last episode when we had Jim on as a guest, where we were focused on community involvement and campus involvement while you're enrolled in a university, and how those leadership opportunities, those transferable skills, they're all ways to round out your personal life, but also your professional development in a non classroom environment, which, like you said, can help people stand out, showing that they have a little bit more of that diversified experiences versus just, I did great in these classes, I read the books, I know my equations, things like that.
That's a very good point. Yeah, because by the book is easy, but when you have to step out of that realm and make decisions and live in the gray area, that's where all the other stuff comes in.
When it comes to determining if a candidate is a right fit, when you're looking at their resume, which obviously is only a snapshot of who they are as a person, and then kind of compare that to who they are in an interview, is there certain areas of each of those evaluations that can tend to drive a decision whether or not they're the right fit for an opportunity?
I think so. Because sometimes in an interview, their resume could look great, right? But we're trying to dig in a little bit deeper. So just turning it into more of a discussion and conversation, it's amazing what you can kind of glean from some of that experience. And I've had the opposite where maybe they didn't tell themselves enough on a resume, and then they'll start telling a wonderful story, and we're like, wow, that's something we haven't even seen in other candidates, that they maybe just didn't think to put on there. So that's kind of how we work it. It's just more of a discussion. It's kind of you're always going to have 3 or 4 hiring folks across from you, which is intimidating. We try to kind of lighten it a little bit, and it seems like folks are more comfortable talking about stuff in that environment. That's kind of been our approach. But yeah, again, those are the things you kind of pick up on. And career advancement, I guess, is another one, right? Like you can kind of tell a trajectory as a person looking for more experience once you're seeing their job lists and stuff like that. So yeah, ultimately, it's the interview that's critical. It's just digging in a little bit deeper.
Well, and I think you make a good point there where sometimes in the interview environment, it can be very nerve wracking. It may be a panel style interview where you've got multiple seasoned professionals. And sometimes it may even feel like an interrogation. But I think it's important to remember that the folks conducting the interview are humans just like you and I, and they are not scary people. They're truly just people that are passionate about what they do, and they want to find other people who are also passionate around those same types of things, that have the skill set necessary to be successful in the role. Because realistically, the people doing the interviewing and the hiring, they want you to succeed, because if you succeed, it makes their job easier, and it goes to show that they found the right candidate for that opportunity. So just a one of those things that's a little cliche, but it's always good to remember that the people conducting the interviews are also just people. And remember, it's a conversation.
Yep, exactly. We've all been there.
From a hiring manager's perspective, are there things that a candidate could do that would stand out kind of as a red flag to you, and maybe help you realize that it's not the right fit for an opportunity?
Yeah, there have been a few of those that stuck out over the years. I would say a lot of times you're going to be having questions coming at you that are situational, right? Like,
Hmm.
how does a person handle conflict? Give us an example. And it's always good to do. You want to think of something that you've dealt with. And we've seen it go the other way where maybe a lot of negativity comes through,
Hmm.
like about a coworker or a company. That can definitely be a reality, but I think in an interview you want to be safe not to be too negative,
Hmm.
especially against someone or a company, because the interviewer only gets half the story, and we kind of know that, right?
Yeah.
So it's a delicate line because you want to get the point across, but there's been times where folks, they probably did have a bad experience, and that's definitely a shame. But where we could just tell, wow, maybe they're not a right fit. 'Cause if something little goes wrong, is that going to be the reaction? It could kind of
Hmm.
plant that little seed doubt. Um, but it's a delicate line to walk, but it's been done.
Mhm.
Sometimes you don't get along with everyone, so you just got to give those examples and how you work through it.
Well, and the reality of the situation is you're not going to be best friends with everybody you work with.
Yeah.
And it's important that somebody has the maturity to realize you don't have to be best friends with somebody to have a successful career orientated relationship. And so being mindful of that. And like you said, kind of the way they interpreted it, and are they putting a negative spin on it and really focusing on the bad stuff? Instead of maybe, even though it was hard to work with that person, what was the outcome? Were you still successful in that project? Was it an achievement? If it ended up not working out and kind of fell apart, what did you learn from that experience that can help you grow as a professional, to maybe not make those same kind of mistakes or troubles in the future? So, kind of the way that you look at those situations, I think, is really important, like you said, to help determine what kind of mindset does somebody have, especially when they're in a challenging situation.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
One of the things that I feel like people are always told is to be confident during an interview. And I feel like there's a fine line between confidence and arrogance. Have there been situations during an interview where somebody maybe has come off as overconfident or trying too hard, versus maybe being who they are in themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's definitely something we've seen. Because you're right. I mean, I've been told that since the dawn of time when I was in high school. Don't be you're confident, you know. But no, again, there's a delicate balance there as well, especially as a hiring manager. Sometimes overconfidence versus someone who has a tough time making decisions.
Mhm.
Overconfidence can sometimes lead to, I guess, more risk. Right? That's just risk tolerance. The person might be
Yeah.
making decisions without consulting with people and stuff, and you can start to get a feel for that in an interview for sure, especially if they're prompt to make decisions or just really kind of closed minded about something, not willing to accept other ideas. That's kind of one way you can pick up on that. But without a doubt, it's something we look for. I wish we could always glean that during an interview. Sometimes it can be tough. But yeah, there's a trajectory there. And I think as a hiring manager, I would say someone a little more hesitant to make calls, especially as a young person, right? Like I remember that. All you know is the book. When you're trying to operate in this gray area that is your career eventually, that can be tough. So when our new folks come to us with questions, we appreciate that because not only are we happy to have the discussion, then it gives them more context. So
Well,
yeah.
and speaking of questions, what would you say is one of your favorite interview questions to ask a candidate to kind of help determine whether or not they're a good fit?
A lot of the times it is the soft skill based ones, right? Like we know that you mentioned it. You're not going to get along with every one of your coworkers. So maybe give us an example of where you did have an impasse with somebody. How were you able to work through it? That's a good one. Sometimes in our world, right, with all the stuff going on, it's like you might have personal opinions, and there's always a line to draw when you're at work and presenting yourself at work. Like, has there
Mhm.
been a situation where that was tough for somebody? That does happen. That
Yeah.
stuff just pops in. So those are a couple of good ones that kind of bring out those skills.
Mhm. And I would agree, those tend to be common questions, and so it's a good thing to prepare for as a candidate, whether that's through mock interview or sitting down and writing out your potential storytelling method for these, because the more you practice interview questions, the easier it's going to be when you're in that room in a higher stress environment. So definitely take the time to practice because it'll become kind of second nature, and make it easier to go through all those different interviews as you're maybe figuring out next steps in a career.
Yeah, I agree. That's good advice. And if you know a little bit about the company culture and what they do from the day to day, sometimes you can discern what the questions might involve. Like with us in forestry, they're very field based.
Mhm.
So we'll pick up on that. And I'm sure it's very different for every industry, but totally agree. Doing a little practice before helps big time.
So this is an interesting question. And based on the way you've answered some of our previous ones, I think I know kind of which direction you'll go with it. But in your opinion, what would be more important? Being perfectly qualified for a role or being coachable, kind of stepping into something new?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head for sure. The latter, coachable. There's been numerous times where we've hired people with very minimal experience. And again, just because we thought they were going to be such a good fit for this team. Luckily, we had the ability at the time. We knew we had time to train.
Mhm.
Oh, definitely the latter. Like you said, just getting along with teammates. It's amazing how far that goes, especially when things get a little tough, which they can from time to time.
Well, and that comes back to kind of the general theme we've heard from a variety of folks. Your degree is great to have, and it
Mhm.
is kind of a fancy piece of paper that says you know how to learn. And
Yeah.
there's only so much you can learn in a classroom. And I don't know of a single employer that doesn't do on the job training, whether it's in a formal setting or just in an experience setting. If there's things you need to know to be successful at your job, especially in a niche field, those are the types of things that they will teach you at that job. So kind of coming back to that confidence side, even if you appear to maybe be a little bit underqualified for an opportunity, that doesn't mean that it wouldn't be a good fit for you, especially if the culture and the personality really meshes well with an opportunity.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And ironically, sometimes, like you said, if it's a niche career or profession, sometimes having a clean slate with someone that hasn't had a lot of experience really allows you to kind of get off on the right foot and hit the
Mhm.
ground running with your methods, right? We've seen that too.
Well, and one of my least favorite phrases from industry is, we've always done it this way. And so from your comment there, it's definitely harder if you're bringing in somebody who has kind of formed some bad habits because, quote unquote, it's the way they had always done it. So I like the idea of kind of having that clean slate and being open to new ideas, maybe new ways of doing things, and not just defaulting back to, well, we've always done it this way. Why try something new? Looking at interviewing, how would you say you would define going from like a good interview to a great interview? Is there certain things that kind of have stood out to you in the past of, this is a good candidate, but this person was a great candidate?
Sometimes it just comes down to when it turns into a discussion. It's hard to explain, but where a person can really just kind of tell their story casually in the beginning. Sometimes we could be half an hour, 40 minutes in, and it's like we touched on everything we wanted to without ever looking at our questions
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
it just kept, rolling and that they had so much good experience and they were able to talk about it, wanted to talk about it. Sometimes that's kind of like the successful route is just they're kind of a little bit more casual, personable, and sometimes you do want to engage with the interviewers a little bit and have it as a discussion, right? They might want to talk about their experience, vice versa. So more of the two-way interaction that seems to really kind of get down into the actual nuts and bolts of their experience more. And it's just less tactical feeling, right? It's
Mhm.
just more personable.
I'm not exactly sure how this question will kind of play out. They say dress for the job you want. Now, you mentioned a lot of times that you're out in the field, out in nature, in the forests. For your specific industry, if it's an in person interview, what would you say is appropriate attire for attending an interview?
That's a good question, and I don't know a lot about other industries, but I will say it's probably a tough thing for folks in ours, just
Mhm.
because you don't want to be wearing necessarily like a flannel and super casual, but you don't want to overdress either because we do need to know that you can go out in the woods for an 8 hour day. It's always kind of been this gray area, and I think people are pretty good about figuring that out. Usually, business casual more than appropriate for us. Even myself, like today, I'm wearing a golf shirt and a vest. Like that's how I'll enter the interview if I'm doing the interviewing. So yeah, nothing too fancy on our end, but I'm sure other industries are very different from that. So we
Well,
kind of
and
have a little range.
exactly, and that's something to be mindful of going into an interview is do a little bit of research into kind of what is appropriate attire for that job field. Because I've worked in a variety of roles where you're expected to come up business casual with a tie. Other spots, khakis and a polo is perfectly acceptable. And then in some of the less traditional career paths, people may show up in a t-shirt and jeans, and that's completely acceptable as well. So having a good understanding of your audience and the industry, I think, play into kind of like you said, you don't want to show up underdressed, but you also don't want to show up overdressed, because that'll help kind of identify if you're a good fit.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And lean on your peers or your professors, or if you're in like any volunteer organization related to your field, a lot of times there will be people willing to talk through some of that stuff with you and be like, this is what worked for us, this is what we've seen. So definitely pays to ask around just to get a little sense of comfort, you know?
Well, and that comes back to another good point of networking and kind of doing the research on a company ahead of time. If you know there's maybe a Michigan Tech alumni who works for the company that you're going to interview for, reach out on LinkedIn, try to connect with them, see if they're willing to do maybe a 15 or 20-minute informational interview with you where they'll tell you about what their job roles and responsibilities are, and what they've learned working for that company to help better prepare yourself to come into that interview, with more knowledge.
Yeah, I would highly advise that. I think it just shows a person willing to take the next step too. Honestly, looking at myself at that age, I probably maybe would have been too nervous to do that. But that shows a real like maturity. So I think that's a very good approach. And usually you'll find that people are absolutely happy to help.
So I will defer to you on if you want to answer this next question or not. But the question is, what's the most memorable interview response you've received, good or bad?
I just have a recent one. Like there's probably many more that I just can't pull on, but this was
Mm.
a good one. Someone with not a lot of experience. We're kind of asking some of those soft skill questions, and just intern level stuff at this point. They're still, I believe, an intern this summer with another company, but just kind of asking, how do you bounce back from, say, you make a major mistake in the woods or something kind of, not a little terrible happens maybe, and it's a real bummer. How do you get past that? It was just such an easy response that you knew was authentic. It's just like, I just have a growth mindset. Like, I know what's going to happen. I'm going to, head it off to the past, get a hold of someone so I can get this fixed and hopefully never do it again. Just kind of own it and work through it and use it as a learning experience. And for me, especially with a young person answering that question, that kind of blew me away because I think that's great because they're not going to dwell on it. Because sometimes you can be your own worst enemy and really reflect too much, probably. So I thought that was just a really good balance of, everyone makes mistakes. Let's just move on with it and, have a teaching moment. So that was recent and that stuck out for sure.
Well, and that sounds like it kind of loops back in with that concept of somebody being coachable in an opportunity where it didn't go as planned. And so now there's a learning objective that came out of that situation. And like you said, they can move forward with that knowledge to hopefully not replicate that incident in the future. This may be a preference thing, or it may even be an industry thing. Are cover letters still relevant, in your opinion, during the job application?
I think so. Again, a resume sometimes can come across as just kind of, factual, a little cold. I think a cover letter just allows you to really add a little bit of the real stuff, right? Like
Mhm.
a little bit of context. There's been stories in there that have really stuck out to us, and it kind of just bolsters the resume a bit, shed some light on it. So I think it does go a long way, especially if you get 10 folks applying, and eight of them did a cover letter and two didn't. It's like you almost feel like you know those eight a little bit more than the two that are about to come in. So I think it holds some value and it probably almost preps you a little bit for the interview because it's hard to tell your own story sometimes. And not a lot of people enjoy doing that. So it kind of forces you to get some of that out and it probably helps during the interview.
Have you noticed as well during like the document submission portion of job postings, like can you tell when somebody has tailored a resume to the job posting versus just kind of their general resume and maybe didn't spend as much time trying to match it with the job description or opportunity?
Yeah, you can usually tell, especially when a cover letter is involved. People are probably are applying for a lot of jobs, which is totally natural, understandable. But you're right, you can really get a feel for someone like really bought into this. They're excited about it. Sometimes that does come through a little bit more versus like a mass produced resume, which is probably needed when you're applying for a lot of places. So understandable, but yeah, you can usually tell.
So just another thing to be mindful of. It's worth the little bit of extra time to kind of fine tune those resumes for your specific job offerings, because you never know what little bit might make you stand out, especially in a competitive job market where there may be 15, 20, even 30 plus other people who have submitted applications. So an extra 30 minutes of your time could be the difference between getting an opportunity to interview where you can really show who you are as a person versus relying on a PDF document to try to capture that.
I've heard too with some colleagues, we're not this high tech yet, but a lot of people might run resumes and cover letters through AI of some sort and match it up against the job description where they're actually looking for keywords. So depending on who you're applying with, that might not hurt too, just to make sure there is some overlap. We still use the human approach here, but I do know that other people use that. So just something to be aware of.
Well, and I know from my perspective, I would much rather be working with a human through a job application than relying solely on software. Because sometimes it can feel like you apply for a job and it just kind of whooshes off into the void and you never know what's actually going on. What piece of advice would you give a job seeker that maybe is trying to transition their career a little bit from one area to a new, whether it's a promotion style transition or maybe even a like industry kind of change?
Yeah, good question. I haven't changed industries really, so maybe I'll focus on the career progression
Okay.
because that happens. It could sneak up on you, like I said earlier. Probably trying to understand. Say you were going to interview hypothetically for that role today. Have an idea in your mind. What are those gaps? Because we're all going to have them. You're never 100% ready for anything.
Hmm.
So if something is glaring to you, like, man, I should really focus on that, or I should try to get into a project where I can manage my peers, maybe to get some management experience, I would lean on that. Like, be a little proactive and understand what are they going to be looking for in me and what might I not have had a lot of experience with. And usually you'll be shocked, an employer, if you go up to them and say, hey, I'd love more experience in XYZ. If I can help out anywhere, that's one way to get a little bit more exposure to stuff. Again, career organizations. Here with forestry, we have a group, Society of American Foresters, tons of career developmental opportunities. And also, actually, to your second point, if you were looking to transition some, that opens you up to a network of people who may have worked in different career paths. And again, they love to talk about it. So having those networks, I think, helps just to get an idea of like what's an important skill set over there, what's it like, and trying to figure out if you like it. That's important too. So
Well, and in that realm of networking, there are probably thousands and thousands of Michigan Tech alum who, like you said, we like to share our stories. So leverage things like the alumni network or even reach out to alumni relations at the university if you're struggling to figure out kind of next steps or maybe connections in certain industries, because ultimately we're all still part of the greater Husky family. So I don't know of any alum who would blatantly say no, especially for a recent grad or a current student who's just looking for maybe some advice or some more information as they kind of navigate their career journey.
I totally agree. And another thing is sometimes it takes a little bit of confidence. Like some of the skills you picked up in your certain career path, they will transfer. It's just you
Mhm.
don't often think that, project management, time management, people management, vendor stuff. You could maybe just own that in your cover letter and say, I haven't existed in this space or this career path, but I do know that my skills will, more than set me up for success. And that is true. A lot of that stuff is transferable for sure.
Mhm.
And sometimes it pays to have somebody who came from a different background. Oftentimes it does.
Yeah. Is there any common mistakes you see that people make kind of on a regular basis during the hiring process?
I would say communicate. That's maybe it. You always hear, spell check your resume. Like we're not going to not interview someone for one little blip like that formatting because heaven knows I've probably done that numerous times today in my emailing. So stuff like that doesn't really bother us too much. But if we're trying to get a hold of you to schedule or give you updates and like we can't, like your voicemail's full or you won't call us back or email us back, usually that starts to cast a little bit of doubt, right? Like
Mhm.
it's a pretty important thing and we thought you were excited and now we can't hear from you. So I think just check your emails and, text, phone, whatever it takes to make sure you're available throughout that process.
Well, in on the topic of voicemails, also double check what is your voicemail recording. Is it something that you want reflected in a professional setting? Because honestly, most of us probably haven't even listened to our own voicemail recording in 5+ years. Which reminds me, I should probably check and see what mine is because I can't even tell you the last time I recorded one. So if you know you're at a spot where you are going to be applying for multiple jobs or going into interviewing for various opportunities, just a fun little tip: double check what your voicemail sounds like. And if it was recorded older than probably 5 years ago, it's best to give something updated, and keep it on the professional side, knowing that potential employers might be reaching out to you and get your voicemail.
Very good point. And delete the deleted voicemails. Sometimes it backs up and then we can't even leave one.
Exactly. So just things to be mindful of, that you probably don't think about when you're going through a job application process.
I think we kind of touched on it a little bit. Trying to find the right career path can be really hard. Some of
Mhm.
these professions are very vast. I know the forestry profession is. It's just daunting to figure out where you want to be, like what's a good career fit. And I'll say from my own experience and kind of a mistake I made is I didn't have any internships when I went to school at tech. And it actually made it very difficult for me to get hired upon graduation. I was a waitress that whole time and literally worked right through my schooling, but my resume was just almost blank in the Department of Forestry, right? So it took me a long time to get my foot in the door. And I would really lean on those internships because it's almost a two-way street. Like the employer will have, 3 months in the summer to get to know you, but you're going to have an opportunity to better understand that employer as well and that industry. So highly recommend that. It just gives you kind of a snippet of what that career could look like. And if that's too much, because sometimes it is, like at the time, my waitressing was ideal for me. It worked out
Mhm.
great. Other things you could do are just ride alongs. Like if you're close to a profession, we do this quite often when we visit the university there at Michigan Tech. We just tell kids, like, if you're interested in spending half a day with us, send me an email, shoot us a text, and we'll, take you out in the woods and show you around. Little things like that can almost give you an idea of like, I am interested in this or maybe
Mhm.
not. Or a sense of comfort too. If say you get the internship and now you kind of met some of the people, day one won't be as scary. So ride-alongs can be another good option.
Well, and in the realm of ride-alongs, we'd touched on kind of the ones related to your industry. I know a lot of the different student orgs at Michigan Tech coordinate plant tours or on-site visits, and so those are another great way to kind of get your foot in the door, check out multiple opportunities, and actually get boots on the ground to see what is it like, being in a specific industry. So check into the various student orgs, different opportunities like that. And if there's something that you're trying to do with like a ride along or get to know more info that you can't find with a student org, reach out to us in career services. We have a vast network of alumni all over the country, pretty much any industry imaginable. And we'll do our best to help connect you with somebody who can make that idea reality for you.
Yeah, good point. Michigan Tech does a great job, especially they just started a natural resources career fair.
Hmm.
It's been a huge hit. Employers from all over the region show up, and I'm sure it's nerve wracking to walk up to those booths, but just know we're there to talk to you. Like there's no need to be nervous, and it can be a very casual conversation. Like you said, even if you're not maybe interested in that role, you can at least get to know some of the companies. That's
Hmm.
a really good opportunity.
So, first, I want to say thank you for taking time out of your day, and stepping away from the woods for a little bit to join me here for our episode here of Husky Careers Unleashed. I love that we have such a diverse group of folks who've joined us on these different episodes and sharing your insight, not just from a hiring manager perspective, but also things that you've seen in your specific industry. So if folks are interested in learning more about your company or potentially connecting with you, is there any resources or ways they can do that?
Yeah, absolutely. Feel free to reach out. My email would probably be best, aoja at lymegreatlakes.com, and that's Lyme. Happy to talk about forestry. It's kind of can be an unknown profession up here, but it's pretty awesome. So happy to talk with students about it. And yeah, feel free to reach out.
Well, and if you guys like these kinds of conversations we're having here on the podcast, be sure to hit that subscribe button wherever you're tuning in from today so you can stay up to date on our future episodes and our future guests sharing their stories, pieces of advice, and anything Husky careers related. So thank you guys, and we will talk to you in the next episode.